Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Studio Storage series. Today we're going to talk to a company that's had a big impact on M&E in recent years, Qumulo. Let's talk about it right now on A Cup of Joe. Well, hello everyone, and thanks for joining me again for another one of these Studio Storage series videos. As I've been talking about in other videos in my introductory video, the space of visual effects and animation is very unique in how it uses storage. This has to do with really high read rates, having thousands of clients all accessing a single storage to access what's often the newest and very small amount of files all at the same time. This is a real big challenge for most storage companies to produce a solution for. And for going on 10 years now, Qumulo has really come onto the scene with a solution that definitely works. It's deployed widely. A lot of folks are using it. They have some real unique aspects to the software and the hardware that Sean's going to talk about in just a minute. And so I'm going to throw it here to Sean Walbridge, Assistant Engineer at Qumulo. He's been with the company now for about 4 months, but he's boned up on everything. So I think he's going to tell us about the history. He's going to tell us now about why it's important. Qumulo has an important place in the media and entertainment space. I'm going to throw it to Sean. Thanks for joining us today.
No, thank you. So while I'm new to Qumulo, I've actually been a Qumulo customer since 2015. I was one of the first visual effects studios running Qumulo at Atomic Fiction up in Montreal. So long history with Qumulo, which was really why I ended up deciding to come to Qumulo, is being on the customer side. It was one of few companies that I thought I could be in this role for. So yeah, so a little bit about Qumulo. We were founded just over 10 years ago, and we were founded by some of the founding members of Isilon, and they kind of wanted to look at, like, start over. Like, what changes would they make going forward if they needed to build out a new storage platform? So what they did is they sat down with, I think it was something like 600 or 700 potential customers, and talked to the customers and said, hey, what do you want? And then they kind of went back and they sat down and they designed that, and then they started to build it. We're a distributed file system. We've got a 4-node minimum, but we don't have a head node. So when you can start a cluster with 4 nodes. We use erasure coding, and we protect at the file level rather than at disk, like with a typical RAID system. And we've got real-time analytics, like all of our metadata is stored in SSD or in RAM. We can do things with analytics and give you a lot better performance on certain things than others. Like our mantra is that we don't do file locks because it's just so inefficient. One of the big things is, like, for me as a customer, as a former customer, one of the biggest things was we have, like, best-in-class support. All of our support is handled over Slack. So you don't have to call a 1-800 number and get tier 1 support and then wait for someone to call you back that actually understands what you're running. With Qumulo, you got to jump on your Qumulo Slack channel, and there's engineers in there 24/7, and someone that knows the product will be helping you within a few minutes. And it's really reassuring as a customer having that support behind you, because, like, everything breaks, but how you're supported when something happens it just makes it so much less stressful. That was one of the big things for me, is coming from, like, JBODs and all that kind of stuff in my past. Going to Qumulo was like, wait, I just don't have that stress of managing storage anymore. And then it's just really simple. Like, we try to keep everything really, really simple.
Storage engineers have to engage in a healthy dose of fear and paranoia to get their job done. It's a scary job with all of that data being so volatile across so many different disks and enclosures and stripes. And so the idea of moving from something where you're engineering every aspect of it, like you were doing, and going to something where it's being managed at a meta level by the OS is really does take some of the pressure off what's already an overstressed position of your storage administrator. If you know your storage administrator, send them chocolate or beer, because they're in a constant state of paranoia. And I believe that Qumulo really helps relieve a lot of those concerns and takes away a lot of those unknowns between the analytics and the fact that it's taking over the OS, as opposed to those build your own solutions you were talking about.
Yeah, and it's just it's simple. Like, that's the great thing about Qumulo, is everything, like one of our mantras is keep it simple, right? It doesn't need to be complicated. You could train someone to use it in 20 minutes and be up and running. So a funny story, when I was up in Montreal, I had a Qumulo cluster come in. It arrived at 10 in the morning. I immediately got it up and running, because obviously we always need storage and you need it right away. It showed up at 10 in the morning, and I had it up and running and starting copying files to it by 3. At 6, the sales guy reached out to ask when I wanted to schedule someone to come and install it for me. And I'm like, it's already done, and its data's already copying to it. And that was 3/4 of a petabyte. We are fundamentally a software company. We used to have our own brand of hardware. Now we have different third-party vendors that we support. We've got our kind of white label box through Arrow. And then we also have HP and Supermicro that we deal with, and then Fujitsu as well if you're in Asia. But because we are just software and we don't have that underlying hardware requirement, we're also able to run natively in all 3 hyperscalers. So we can run in Amazon, AWS, and Google natively. And then in Azure, we run as a service. So you just say, we want X number of petabytes, and we'll set it up for you, and we'll manage it, and we'll do the updates and stuff like that.
So in that sense, there's dedicated hardware, dedicated resources deployed for Qumulo in that case, in the Azure case.
Yeah, just in Azure. Everything else you can, like, I can walk you through it in AWS. It's really simple to set up in AWS and GCP.
Very few large places are completely on the cloud, right? But they want to have that flexibility. And you're saying that Qumulo offers them that flexibility of the hybrid cloud on-prem environment a little better than some of the others.
Yeah, so we've got built-in replication. So if you've got a Qumulo cluster on-prem, you can replicate to a Qumulo cluster that you fire up in AWS as you need it, right? So if you have 100 terabytes that you need to render on in the cloud, you can fire up that Qumulo instance in AWS in a matter of minutes. You can get that up and running, and then you can start your replication up to AWS, render your stuff, have the output data replicate back to your on-prem cluster, and it's simple. You can't possibly build out the infrastructure to have all the render capacity you could ever need on-prem. It just doesn't make sense these days.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. I mean, there's different ways people can burst out, right? They have their for people to understand it, right? Like studios will have they'll have a need of their general on-prem storage and their on-prem render. Then they'll actually be able to bring in some rental, which is sometimes available, depends on your city, depends on your data center. If you have space, so you can bring in maybe some rental. Then the next stage, of course, is like private cloud, kind of like CDW, where you might extend a dark fiber and then just build out the rest of your on-prem for a month or two in their facility. And then finally there's this, I need 100,000 cores tonight for a night or a week. And then they finally burst to the clouds. They create this pyramid stack where at the peak is that burst, but the burst does come, of course, at a premium. I mean, I can't speak for sure for everybody's case, but for the most part, X amount of terabytes over a year Qumulo on site versus X amount of terabytes for a year on the cloud. Most folks that are of a larger footprint are trying to keep as much of that data they can in their on-prem environment, and then using the cloud only on an as-needed basis. OpEx is helpful, but of course it comes with a premium.
Yeah, and absolutely. It's a different way to look at it. And like when I was at Atomic, when I started, we had like 12 render nodes and we were doing the Deadpool three-way sequence. I'm like, wait, what? We only have 12 render nodes. But they built everything like financially to render in the cloud, and they had their own system and everything else. But not most places aren't like that.
what are those specific aspects of Qumulo that really appeal to the media entertainment market? I know you guys sell to more than just media entertainment, but what are the aspects of Qumulo that make it extra appealing to those visual effects and animation companies?
Yeah, the big thing for us is the analytics. That's
Yeah.
the biggest thing, is just being able to see where your data is. I've had instances where I had a render running on the farm. It was filling up a bunch of, like, I could see just the massive amount of data it was creating from the analytics. And then as a quick and dirty hack to solve the issue, I just put a quota on that directory, killed it. The render job failed. Now I could figure out which job it was. And so just the analytics built into Qumulo will help you find things you never would have found before. I found back in the day, we had a pipeline job that was supposed to run after a render that cleaned up the IFD files from Houdini, but it wasn't running. So we gradually saw this exponential increase in storage over less than a week. We found 9 terabytes of IFDs that weren't getting cleaned up afterwards. And we just kept seeing this steady increase in growth. And using the analytics, we were able to go figure out what that was. It's the biggest thing for me for being in M&E is the analytics, but then also the ability to have that scale up file system. So you can just add nodes, you get more storage, you get more capacity, and you get more performance. And we can do a node add depending on what protocols you're using. If you're running NFS, we have non-disruptive updates. And when you add a node, it's effectively the same as doing a software update. And when you add a node, if you're running NFS, your clients won't even know, because we'll do the quorum event, but that happens so quick because we run in a container on the nodes. We can fire up the new container and then cut over to it very quickly. If you're running at Windows and SMB, there's a bit more of a hit because the protocol doesn't allow us to migrate over floating IPs quickly. But you can just add nodes and scale up as well as out.
Yes.
So
great. And anyone who's watched my channel knows that I have dozens of videos that talk about the importance of getting your data, getting business information on your data, right? Knowing where your data is, it allows you to clean up. Obviously, the most pressing concern is usually like, let's just get some data cleaned up, but also being able to predict how to shape your pipeline, how to create cleanup scripts, what to predict in your next shows based on your previous shows usage and performance. Having those analytics fuels all of that. And a lot of times, and over the years until Qumulo came along, especially, everyone had to build those analytics on their own from scratch, doing tree walks like Sean mentioned. And if you go back to any CRAF conversation where Phil Peterson was in the room, who's kind of a well-known guy in the business, he would just scream about how much all the developers doing tree walks and all the IT guys doing tracks, how much it's actually functionally slowing down your file system. So getting these analytics natively without having to do tree walks is a real important aspect that I just want to overemphasize as much as I can. That has been, I think, when I first heard about Qumulo back when I was still at the studio side, that was what stood out to me the most. Performance wise, I figured, coming from where they came from, performance wise, it was going to stack up, but hearing about those analytics, but for me, was the extra selling point.
Yeah, and to talk about the performance, so we've got our active archive, which they're still pretty performant. Like, we do have customers that run those as their production storage, but typically they're kind of designed more for archive. But some studios don't have a lot of money, and obviously if they're smaller, they want that cheaper. They don't necessarily need full-on, they don't need the Ferrari, they need the Ford F-150. But then, so we also have our hybrid nodes, which are hard drive backed, but then they've got lots of SSD or NVMe in them. And they performed really well. Our predictive caching is very, very effective. We typically see about 80 to 90% cache hits so you're almost getting the performance of Flash without having to pay for it. So I consider it the Corvette. So they're very popular. I've deployed, that's what I've typically run in an M&E environment. But sometimes you do want that Ferrari. So we do also have all flash arrays. They are blazingly fast. Studio up in Montreal just bought a nice big all flash array, and it's just amazingly fast. So that's our persistent performance, because you don't have to worry about latency. It's just all out speed.
Flash kind of paves over today's problems for a lot of VFX. I mean, yes, it comes with a premium, but man, when you deploy it, you just wipe out for the foreseeable, for the near-term future, a whole lot of your inefficiencies, delays, IO waits on your farm, streams going to playback that aren't quite color and frame accurate. They all just whoop, clean right up when you start going to Flash. And that's why we're seeing more rapid deployments. That's why you have that Flash layer right on top of your hybrid layer. It may not be a full Flash system, but it's still providing that Flash throughput. And so most of the Premier solutions these days better involve Flash.
So one of the other benefits of Qumulo, especially for M&E, and we typically have pipelines built out, and Qumulo has a fully featured API, so you can do everything you can do within the GUI through the API as well. It's a standard REST API, and a lot of pipelines will use that to like create directories automatically and set permissions and things like that. So you can do a lot through the pipe with your pipeline tools directly through the API, instead of having to like create directories with a shell script or something like that.
Interacting with something like ShotGrid or what's F-Track, right? I think F-Track.
Yeah,
These type
F-Track.
of production management systems, they also allow you to integrate, right? So you can say, hey, if I mark this this shot is done, then maybe start migrating those to an archive stage, and that this type of functionality can occur with the APIs, right? I mean, that's the idea behind it.
Yeah, and like many companies, they use the shotgun integration. Like they'll build pipelines through when if someone marks a version is bad in shotgun, they'll go through and like, okay, I'm going to delete those files because I don't need them on disk anymore. And then the last thing is we are an agile company, so we do release software every 2 weeks, which for me in my history was like, wait, what? I'm not doing an update every 2 weeks. But because we do have the non-disruptive updates, it's fairly quick, but typically there's no interruption at all. But we also have quarterly releases, and those are kind of like, if you get too far behind because you're mad production, which never happens. The nice thing is that we get features out to customers early, and they can start to test with it and explore it and give us feedback, so we can lead our development in that direction, instead of getting an update once a year or once every 6 months, and then I got to plan that out. And
in a moment here, I'm going to have you go ahead and maybe demo some stuff, but I just want to talk about what I try to talk about in all of these sessions is using the same overly generalized grid of small, medium, and large companies, right? So as I think I've showed you this grid in the past, right? We've got the small, which is, around 50 to 150 people, up to maybe 80 to 150 terabytes, a wide range of flexibility in those numbers. But the medium companies are probably the widest range of flexibility, but I just chose maybe 250 to 750 terabytes. That medium company that's maybe running 2 to 4 projects at a time at some stage, with 2 finishing at the same time when they don't want them to, because that's the business. And then finally large, the real large companies that are running maybe 5+ studios, they're generally running over a petabyte. They're probably tiered at that point with their storage, and they'll have, say, 200,000 cores. When you look at those, and I always like to point out, studios grow through those stages. These are not discrete stages. They start small and they work their way up to medium and large. How do you try to position some of your deployments so that they can be positioned for growth and can still handle the small clients and grow to be big?
You kind of grow as you need to. We can mix nodes, which is interesting. So if you've got, so say you start small and you buy the C72 node, and then you keep growing and like, hey, I need to add massive amounts of capacity. So now I'm upgrading my network and I want to move to 100 gig. So you can take your C72 nodes and you can add a C192, which is our newer NVMe flash systems. NVMe hybrid systems, I should say. So you can add the C192, or if you go like mad crazy, you can now add our even bigger nodes, the C432s, which is a 3U or 2U chassis with 432 terabytes. So it's kind of crazy, but let me walk you through. We can go pretty small. Qumulo branded hardware. This is the smallest we can go, is 52 terabytes usable. This is our all flash nodes, so you're going to get fantastic performance, but this is pretty much the smallest we can go on the Qumulo side. Here we go to the super micro nodes. This is a 68 terabyte usable. Again, these are all flash as well. I kind of wanted to show the smaller ones are typically all flash. So again, this is a 68 terabyte usable. And that's one other thing, is when we give you a number, you can use 100% of that usable space with no performance impact. Back in the day, I was running my Qumulos at 99.2%. My sales guy hated it because every month he had to explain why we were running so hot. But we didn't have any performance issues. So, and eventually that show is going to wrap. So we'll just.
And I like that you're starting with this kind of all flash approach too, because with smaller shops, they often don't have a big team of folks to troubleshoot, right? And so, like I said earlier, Flash paves over a lot of the problems that sysadmins and system engineers are having to work through. So you just eliminate those problems by just starting off with Flash. So,
oh, absolutely. Like you can see these numbers, like 19 gigabytes per second from a 4-node cluster. It's just mind-blowing to me.
yeah, and the IOPS, right? I mean, not it's something that people always don't understand, that they need to focus on in rendering so much, right? Of those darn IOPS. And here you got 96,000 IOPS just on this on this one small deployment of 4 nodes.
Yeah, and this is a 4U setup. Like this is smaller than a standard Supermicro JBOD. Next up, we've got our HPs. Again, this is our hybrid model, so it isn't all flash. So this is 4 nodes, 80 terabytes usable, which is kind of the low number that we talked about. And here the performance numbers aren't as good as the flash, obviously, but we still get really, really good performance on the cached reads and writes. One of the nice things about Qumulo is when we're an all-inclusive license. So when we roll out new features, you get all of that included. And one of the features it's not really a feature, but we just shipped in 5.10, we shipped an update that increased write performance by 20 to 30% on a typical cluster. Some customers were even seeing up to 100% write improvement. And that was we did some optimization to our partial stripe rates. And you just get that for free by doing an update. It's kind of cool.
Wow.
So now we've got our white label kind of hardware. So this is the C72. This is kind of more of a standard for a VFX shop. This is probably where I'd position someone smaller in that smaller facility. 4 nodes. This is 25 gig networking. So lots of smaller shops don't have 100 gig. This is probably more typical, 168 terabytes. You know, you're going to have that growth, kind of plan for it now, but you can just add nodes, right? This config can scale to 53 nodes the way it's set up now. This is really where these are my favorite. Like as much as I love the Ferraris, these are what I've bought in the past. The C192 is kind of our perfect fit for VFX workloads. So kind of getting into that 500 terabytes minimum for this hardware platform. So it'd be your more middle ground shop. But the nice thing about the C192 is it is 100 gig, but it is all NVMe for the hybrid, for the caching layer. We hit about 80 to 90% cache reads, or reads are hitting cache. You're effectively getting the performance of the Ferrari for the price of the Corvette.
Yeah, because of that flash layer, that NVMe layer.
Yeah, the performance of the C192 is just fantastic. And it, like you can see the numbers, like 70,000 IOPS from a 4-node cluster. It's not quite 95 with the all flash, but you're getting that capacity with the hard drives, but getting the benefit of the NVMe on the front end.
Yeah, these shows will grow very large, but like I keep saying, it's a small number of the newest files that are most often accessed. So you kind of need it all sitting there in the box, but you don't need it all sitting there on flash and in the front. That's why the larger you get, the more you start thinking about a little bit of a tier, a little bit of two different places to store the data, even if it's happening behind the scenes.
The nice thing with Qumulo, as you grow, you just add another node, you get more capacity, you get more throughput. Like if you look at Here we have 4 C192s and we're hitting 14 gigabytes per second for a cache read. But then you add another node, now you're up to 17.5 gigabytes per second. So I know we talked about the scaling up the file system to go into the like multi-petabyte range. You can just keep adding C192s and you get your number is going to go up fairly linearly, which I'll show you in a second. But we also have the C432. So let me just bring, this is our capacity sizing tool that we have. So I exported this PDF. So it gives you all the metrics. It gives you all the environmentals, which we can generate. Typically, we send these out to customers with kind of an idea of what they're looking at. But the nice thing is as you add nodes, you just get more space. And then you also scale up your capacity, your IOPS, and your throughput. So
yeah, these are graphical representations of the classic term scale out and its finest, right? It's just linear. You keep adding nodes. I use the trademark term Lego blocks, you know, when I'm explaining it to producers and people who aren't too technical. It's like you just add Lego blocks to the situation.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
And you just keep plugging them in. You're going to run out of rack space before we run out of performance. You can always go to the C432s, which are just mind-blowing because it's a 2U chassis and it's 432 terabytes in a 2U chassis. They're just crazy. But then you look at the numbers, we can get up to, let me zoom in here. So you can get up to, so you have 16 node cluster, you're at 4 petabytes and you're hitting 240,000 IOPS. And it just keeps going. You can scale this out to 100 plus nodes if you'd like, if you could grow that big.
You're getting pretty big there. I'm going to say, you know, you're getting into the largest that most studios run a single cluster. You're talking about the interface a bit. And if you don't mind, maybe we could take a little moment here. You can share out your screen and you can show us a little bit how the interface works. I think you've got something set up for us here today.
Absolutely. I'd love to show it off. It's amazing. And just the amount of information you can see in real time is fantastic. So let me share my screen again. You log in, this is what you get. This is the dashboard. So it's giving you a high level view of everything. This cluster is a demo cluster that we've got. We've got some workloads against it just to show it in use, but it's also at 92% because we don't have an issue running pretty hot. So you can see your IOPS and your read and write IOPS in real time, your throughput, and you can see how many files you've got and how many directories and all that, because we don't really have any issues with large amounts of files or directories. Small files, big files, doesn't matter to us the way we store data on disk. And you can see the latency for clients for read and writes. But again, this is just high level, kind of first glance, what's going on. You can see the historical data. Like this is, you can go back in time if you want to see the data longer term. You can just scroll this out and go back as far as you want. You can see your most active clients for IOPS and throughput, and your distribution across the nodes, because that can be really important. We use round robin DNS to distribute the load across the cluster. And sometimes you can identify an issue where your DNS got messed up or whatever. All your nodes are hitting one, or all your clients are hitting one node. So it's kind of a good thing to look at. But it's just giving you, like I said, the overview of what's going on. You can go into a lot more detail. Back when I was a Qumulo customer, my biggest thing was I leave on Friday, there's plenty of space. I come in on Monday and we're almost out of space. So I'm like, what happened over the weekend? So here I would go into the analytics and I would look at our capacity trends and be able to see, like, here's the capacity history over time. And you can change it from 72 to going back to a year. But really, to me, the biggest thing was to be able to go here and see the capacity change over time. So I can see, okay, there was 114 gigs added to the cluster at this point, but then someone did a delete. So, but the nice thing is you can actually click on this and it will expand out down here to show me where that data landed. So this is super nice to be able to, like, okay, I know where my culprit is and I can go and I can figure out. So from here, I would typically go to the Capacity Explorer and figure out what's in those directories and what that data was. And so looking at Capacity Explorer, again, real time. You can click through here. This always blows away people seeing this, because this is real time. You can just click through the directory and see exactly where all your data is. With our analytics, you can actually see top activity by client. You can see how much traffic they're doing, but you can also see what they're accessing. So if your farm is all of a sudden hitting a specific thing, you can come in here and you can see that in real time, like it's updating in real time. But you can also see it by path. So you can kind of see, oh, okay, this is something's hitting this really hard, and okay, chances are it's the render farm. And so there's different ways that metadata can be really helpful to have the analytics to look at that. Throughput hotspot, so you can kind of see, again, in real time. It's just a different way to look at it, but it can be very beneficial to see what's going on.
It's very intuitive. I mean, your average, anyone who's familiar with the show should be able to look at this very quickly. Say, like, if you open this up with the VFX soup, he would immediately, or he or she would immediately be thinking, why is that shot active? And why is there so much going to that shot? It's amazing what, when they do get a moment to see it, your VFX soups, your DFX soups, your CG soups, they will intuitively just spot 3 or 4 things that just you can go talk to that artist right now and have them stop.
We've got snapshots, like typical enterprise. You can set a policy and kind of never have to worry about the snapshots happening. One of the big things with Qumulo is we've got built-in replication, so you can replicate from one Qumulo cluster to another. Example, you got different facilities, or if you've got, if you want to replicate because you're going to burst into AWS, you can replicate to another Qumulo system. Sometimes studios are looking to move to S3 for archive. So we can also, using that same replication engine, we can now use what we call shift, which will migrate data to an S3 bucket. It can be in Amazon. As long as it's S3 compliant, like Wasabi or Backblaze, you could use that as well. The nice thing is you can move data to S3, and then you can also bring it back. So if you need to restore a project, you can just use the same replication engine to move it back. So we have cloud-based monitoring of every cluster, assuming the customer wants that enabled. We do have some customers that don't have it enabled for security reasons, but it allows us the ability to kind of keep an eye on it for you, right? When I was up in Montreal, I would get a call at 7 o'clock in the morning as I'm on the train on the way into the office saying, I have a delivery. And I'm like, okay, it's a Qumulo hard drive. So they'd shipped a drive that died overnight. Even though I had on-site spares, they had a new drive dispatched immediately, and it was there at like 7:30 in the morning. So the cloud-based monitoring gives us that ability.
And for those folks who are in dark sites because of TPN and other security concerns, they're able to essentially export out logs and sort of just manually present you with the same data that you'd be fetching, just an extra step that's required by an admin.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we've got quite a few customers that don't have the remote support turned on.
Talked about the hybrid model, the fact that every studio should either be interacting with burst render or at least testing and getting ready to use the cloud when they need to. So maybe you can tell me a little bit more, or show us how Qumulo interacts with the cloud.
Yeah, so let me just share my screen. I'm going to do something that people should never do, that it's always a risk to do, is I'm going to do a live demo, and I'm going to fire up a actual Qumulo cluster in AWS while we're talking. Here I'm logged into AWS, and you can see I don't have anything running. And before I click the buttons, because we have these magic buttons that do stuff for us, I'm actually going to show you the Terraform script that we provide. And again, we've got quick start guides. We'll walk you through all this if you want to deploy. We have a promotion now called Cloud Now. We'll give you a free petabyte of data in the cloud. I don't know when this is going to get posted, but we'll do a POC if you want to try it out. So this is basically firing up an AWS instance. It's firing up a full Qumulo cluster from scratch, and it's so fast. So I'm going to click this magic button, which is basically just running that script in the background. It's got all the information, and so there we go. Like in the time we've been chatting, I now have an AWS, or I've got a Qumulo running in AWS. So here's the job. Here's the, there we go.
Looks like a Qumulo cluster.
And the nice thing about software is it's exactly the same running in the cloud as you would be on-prem.
I usually ask about support options. You mentioned about it earlier. Generally, it's done through a Slack channel. I imagine is there some sort of ticketing procedure for major issues and that might accompany that, or is it exclusively through the Slack channel format?
Yeah, so you can call the 1-800 number and you'll get someone, or you can send an email. But in reality, you'll get the best support over Slack because you'll get more people on it quicker. But obviously, when there are bigger issues, we'll be in touch and we'll be talking already. So Slack is where to go. And I think it fundamentally changes the support.
Is there anything you could round up as to like what's on your roadmap that's not inside the NDA, non-disclosure agreements? Is there anything you can tell us about what to expect from Qumulo in the coming weeks, months, in the future in general?
So the big one that the big ones that we have now is we want to wrap up the front end protocols. We've got NFS v4.1 that I talked about. We're rolling that out now. We just released a version today, 5.1.5, that's got Kerberos support. And we're gonna, because we released little bits here and there, we're gonna be rolling that out over the year. We've also recently added S3 as a front end protocol for those people that actually want to write to the Qumulo as if it was an S3 bucket. Kind of that last way people access their unstructured data is through S3. So we wanted to have that. We looked at the work involved and realized that we have a lot of things in place for it. So we've decided to add S3 as a front end protocol. And then the other big thing is just that we call it internally transcoding, which for us M&E people, it means something totally different, but it basically is going to allow you to remove or replace nodes from your cluster. Again, that's an ongoing thing. It's probably into next year, but we'll see. Those are the big things. We've done a lot of work on the write performance. So now we're moving over to the read performance, and we're looking at the best options for improving that, and also what our best option is for single stream performance, because that's important for those editorial workloads or stuff like that. So.
Well, we've got a load of information here, and I really appreciate it. I think anyone who's watched this video has got a great sense now of where Qumulo stands. And if you have an interest in learning more about this, you can, of course, go to their website. If you have an interest in actually talking to Qumulo, feel free to reach out to me. I always throw out my Cup of Joe email right here. And if you reach out to me, I'll put you in touch with Sean. Sometimes folks in Canada, US, I might put you in touch with different people depending on where you're at, but I'll make sure that you get routed to the right person and you can start diving into whether or not Qumulo is going to be the right fit for you. Decent chance it is from what we've seen. So let's just feel free to reach out to me and I'll put you in touch with Sean. All right, I appreciate all your information, Sean. You have a great day, and we'll send anyone who has questions your way.
Thank you very much.